start my recording. And what we will do is we will make it available, both the PowerPoint and this recording, through the Provost's website, if Mike is okay with that. And that's how we'll distribute this for the people that can't be here today. So I wanted to start by having Mike give a little bit of a background on this, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, so the background for today's workshop and the one that'll happen in February actually started back with the NEAS comprehensive review. In their review of materials, when the site team came to campus, they looked at all sorts of materials, including what was on the Provost website, and they noticed there were materials there from a workshop that had been conducted in 2010, this RPT workshop. And for those of you that were around at that time may remember Ellen Bullier, who at that time I think held the role of VPAA, basically sponsored a university-wide workshop around best practices using the AAUP document, which still ends up being the most current document from that organization around best practices. And I thought it was a great workshop, bringing everybody on the same page as it relates to best practices and RPT reviews. So fast forward to my new role in July. Since coming into the role, I've seen all sorts of variation in processes across the different colleges. Lots of questions surfacing around what had been submitted for portfolios by faculty in the different colleges. And on the review side, lots of questions surfacing around the reviews themselves and inconsistencies across units. And I talked to Frank about this fairly early on around some of the questions I was receiving, which I was like, I'm not exactly sure why we're not all on the same page with this. So those two factors probably are the major driving factors in saying, why don't we go ahead and offer some educational sessions again around best practices and RPT review. We'll update the materials on the Provost website. And we staggered them, so this is the first of two, which is really targeting folks that are still in the pipeline for review. We didn't want to do it too early because we thought the people that were currently being reviewed, depending on what came out of these workshops, would think, well, how does this influence my current review? It wasn't intended to do that. So this is really looking forward for folks that are going to be reviewed in upcoming review cycles. And then we're going to offer another workshop probably somewhere in the February timeframe that's going to be for all the people who serve as evaluators in the process, all the way from sub-college to university level reviews. And again, bringing everybody together to get everybody on the same page. And I was really pleased because I think when this was announced in UFA that this was targeting more of the junior faculty audience. Stina had asked, well, is this restricted? It's like, no, absolutely not. We'd love as many people as possible to attend these to kind of hear the dialogue, and again, making sure that we're all, that's the goal, is to make sure that we're all on the same page. Thanks to Charles and Jennifer. So Frank put a call out, I think, to many of the college deans saying, do you already have processes in your college where you do this? So for some of you, this may be repetitive, but all colleges do not have processes where they sort of go in depth, or it happens to varying levels of degree about how they actually mentor new faculty coming into the university about how to put together a portfolio, when you should start working on that, and all of that sort of thing. So very appreciative that you agreed to do this today. And as Frank mentioned, we're audio recording this. I have lots of questions. I can't come today, but are you recording it? Because I'd really like to be able to access it at a future date. So we will post. I have updated the Provost website with the resources in mind. So if you haven't been there lately, I've tried to also post some other kinds of resources that I thought would be of interest to the faculty. So this will be just one of those additional resources. So we'll update that RPT stuff. So again,
Perfect.
Thanks for your work in pulling this off. And busy time of semester, obviously, for everybody, but glad that everybody's here to hear it.
Fantastic. All right. So what I'd like to do is get started and give a little bit of a perspective about why me and why we're pulling this together. So I served as chair of the university RPT committee back in 2011 through 2013 or so, and I know Jennifer has served on that committee as well. Additionally, by being chair of the faculty assembly, Mike reached out to me to try and get these connections going, and I performed a similar function for the dental program, the dental college, back in September as they got started at the beginning of their semester activities. So that's really what we started working from, and then I reached out to Jennifer and Charles to try and flesh out a university-wide sort of training PowerPoint. So what I want to do is just share the PowerPoint with the other campus, so they're going to stop seeing us and hopefully see the PowerPoint. If I can get this to work. And I didn't lose it. And can you guys see the PowerPoint okay? If someone, no, yeah. No, it's not really disappeared. All right. Oh, no, it's not yet. All right, so they can't connect. Network issues, keeping us from sharing the notes. Join it. So this is the first time I'm trying to Skype and PowerPoint at the same time. And Bill and I did try this out earlier, and it seemed to work okay. But oh. All right, we'll try one last time, and then what we'll do is, if this isn't going to work, I know, Bill, you have the PowerPoint up there. And Bill, can you put that up in the room itself, display that? Because I don't think the connection is going to work for us. So he said he'll open the file itself. So let him do that. And what I will do is just bring this PowerPoint to the front. I'm not going to completely enlarge it, just so that we can keep an eye on their comments. So what I wanted to do really here at the start is encourage everyone to go to Provost Sheldon's website, and on his website there is the most up-to-date copy of the faculty handbook. So you can see here where it's at. I suppose I can do it. Oh, it's not going to help if I connect that way. Let's see, do it this way. So here you can see it says for faculty, and underneath this for faculty window, you can see that we have the faculty handbook, and then descriptions about our different committees. So this is from his older website. His new website is going to look a little bit different, but there are connections to the faculty handbook. It's this faculty handbook that is going to drive the whole RPT process for us. Tell us what to be submitted, deadlines for submission, and tells the committees how to review the portfolios. So when we click into that website, you can see here is the faculty handbook for 2017. And it's just the cover page, and you'll notice that you have to go to page 16 to where you get to section 3, which is starting to get into the whole reappointment, promotion, and tenure process and guidelines. So you don't have to read the whole faculty handbook, and it's really nice because as the PDF, you can actually search for words, and you can just do word searches to find the words you're looking for. So that's really where you're going to want to focus. And Bill just said he has the PowerPoint up. So here, that's really where you want to start. And I really think the best way to do it is for individual faculty members to kind of walk through and keep an eye on what role they're in specifically, and then how the faculty handbook describes what they're supposed to be doing at each step. So this slide really just shows you the different ranks and classifications that we have here at UNE. In the tenure stream, we have assistant professor, associate professor, and professor. And then in the non-tenure stream, we actually have 3 different tracks. One is the lecturer track, which tends to be a little bit more focused towards teaching, or significantly more focused towards teaching. And then there's assistant clinical professor, associate clinical professor, and clinical professor for people who are in the health-related fields. And then we have research professors at the assistant, associate, and professor level for those who are a little bit more research-focused. But all of these different categories are still referred to in the faculty handbook. So depending on where you fit, you should be able to find each of these categories and then the specific criteria at those levels in the faculty handbook for how you're going to be assessed. Each of the colleges, in addition to having university standards, is going to have their own college standards. And these college standards are also in the faculty handbook. They tend to be further along in the faculty handbook. So the university standards are right around page 16 or so. The college standards, you can see here, start on page 52 and stretch through, just about page 100. So what I have on this PowerPoint is the college standards for the College of Arts and Sciences, the College of Dental Medicine. It's a little bit small to read the font, but College of Osteopathic Medicine, College of Pharmacy, and the Westbrook College of Health Professions. There are no standards at this point for the College of Graduate and Professional Studies, but I think as their faculty get more mature and figure out their representation, they will be pushed to develop standards for their own college as well. So depending on what college you're in, you should not only refer to the university standards, but certainly refer to the college standards as well. So that's where you should at least start focusing your development of your portfolio. But as Jennifer and Charles and I were starting to talk about this, we started to kind of come up with little tidbits for how you should assemble your portfolio and what really needs to go into the portfolio. And one of the things we figured out, or we knew, but we wanted to emphasize, is you need to collect proof of your scholarship and your teaching and your service. And the time to start doing that is as soon as you start at the university. So I pulled this quote up because I was looking at collecting things, and someone said, oh, you should collect moments and not things. We need proof that you've done the service and the scholarship and the teaching. So we really need you to collect things, letters of thanks, course evaluations, review letters, if you've done scholarship, representations of your scholarship, whether it's the novel or an article or a poster or your students' work, anything that you could really start to collect. The university asks you to submit them as PDF files. It doesn't really take that long to convert them, so I'd recommend to save them as PDF files as you go, rather than convert them all on the day you're trying to load everything, because it's not a one-day procedure. I'm sure most of you know that any step you can have to save time later on will help. One other thing, and I'm going to just shift the PowerPoint here to the way the university organizes the portfolios is helpful, and it's likely to change here in the next 2 or 3 years, but unlikely to change for September of 2018. So right now, we use the Google site, specifically sites at google.com, specifically linked to UNE. And this is my cover sheet, but your cover sheets would look similar. But thinking about saving these PDFs, it helps if you can organize them on your own computer the way you're going to put them into your RPT portfolio. So the way your RPT portfolio is going to be set up is you're going to have this cover sheet, which you can see here on the PowerPoint. But we're also going to have a table of contents, and that table of contents is really well described in the faculty handbook. And all you're going to do is really put checks on that table of contents and maybe titles of what you've included. Similarly with the checklist, the third tab over, it's really just saying you've done this, it was you that did it, and you're signing off that it was you and it's as complete as possible. Then you start getting into the documentation parts where you're adding your CV, your curriculum vitae, and any sort of licensure documentation. If you get licensed on a regular basis or on an annual basis or a semi-annual basis, you'll want to keep records of that continued licensing over time. It helps if you have a file on your own computer saying licenses or current licenses or old licenses, so you can just pull them all so you aren't searching for it the day you're trying to submit your portfolio. The years of service documentation is the same sort of thing. If you'll have your initial letter of hire, you'll have your annual contracts, and those certainly could be included as part of this. I think that's usually what I put in. I suppose the other thing that I usually put in, and if you guys, Jennifer and Charles, would comment, I usually put in my own annual evaluation. So we have to do self-evaluations in the College of Osteopathic Medicine. And then our department chair builds off of those self-evaluations, and that's how the annual review process works. So usually in that years of service documentation folder, I'll put in all of my annual reviews. So on my computer, while I'm storing everything, waiting for my next review process, I'll have something that says annual reviews, and it's every single year. I'll update it, and as I get my departmental chair letter, I'll put that in there as well. And then in the College of Medicine, I'm not sure all other colleges do this, but we also have a personal responsibility agreement. And this personal responsibility agreement, or a PRA, kind of outlines how much time we're supposed to be spending doing scholarship or teaching or research, or scholarship and teaching and research, because it's a blend of all of them. So I'll put my annual PRAs in there as well. It's not just the most recent one, but it's ones that have changed over time, because you want to be able to show your committees that although this year my teaching load was X and my scholarship load was Y, it might have been different 3 or 6 years ago, and you want to be able to show that change over time.
Frank, if I could just add.
Oh, yes, please.
So, yeah, because I'm sort of, that's really interesting, because I was just thinking that when I have done this in the past, that tab wasn't as populated, but it did have my appointment letter and some other information about my position. But I think you're right, like partly what you're doing is documenting all of the licensure and all that, but you're also documenting, under what terms were you hired or reappointed, the percentages or the expectations or whatever. So whatever that looks like, it might
absolutely
come in a variety of forms. And then the other thing I'll just quickly mention is that in CAS, we do an annual evaluation, a self-eval, and then the way that document is set up, our supervisor, department chair, adds their part to the same document afterward, and that becomes our annual evaluation. So for CAS, what I have done in the past, although I don't know if there's one right way to do it only, is I would put that under prior evaluations, just to be clear. So for my situation, I wouldn't have annual self-evals in the years of service tab, but those would appear elsewhere.
Absolutely. And I think you'll get that, a little bit of variation that way. Yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, and just one very practical point, and this is one of the things I saw this year. It's not any of the reviewers' purview to know your salary, and it's amazing how many people do not redact that from the document, but then it comes up later in the review saying, hey, I don't think we're supposed to be seeing that person's salary. So if you're putting this together, that would be a part of the information in your hire letter and or subsequent contracts that you can just literally white out, because that's not part of anybody's business that as part of this review process. And I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, can we get back in to somebody's file and redact all that information? That actually came up a lot this year.
Kat.
While we're speaking of tax, I'm curious to maybe some of the changes that you're coming out in the next few years, but for colleges such as Tom or the other LMs or density might be another common issue. We have clinical faculty for whom there is a fourth domain, which is clinical performance. And we have incorporated into the annual evaluations that fourth domain as, it's clinical, it's also clinical teaching, and this is what we're putting bedside teaching. So one is to check in while we have those, is that where the chair actually putting bedside teaching? And two, suggestions for consistency and under what tab that goes in a clinical tab. And I have had some struggles in how to instruct people. I think we're sort of doing it in the level.
All right. So I just heard from the Portland campus that they want me to kind of summarize that. So just what Kat Brandt was saying is that there are clinical faculty who get evaluated on their clinical teaching and their clinical performance. And their quality, the quality of their clinical teaching, the quality of their clinical performance, and there's measures and standards that can be evaluated there. And she's wondering where it should be put in the RPT portfolio that's on the Google site, and if there's a standardized place to put it.
My response to that would be, and it's my understanding, be kind of curious to see if anybody on the Portland campus is part of this work. That is something that programs that have clinical components like that, because even within the clinical category of faculty, some of them do more direct instruction of students and others do more what could be considered administrative tasks. So they oversee the clinical education, but they're not necessarily doing the direct instruction of the students. And that's become an issue because I know in the Westbrook College of Health Professions, for example, last year, it was all over the place between programs about where they put it, and even how it was considered in the annual performance appraisals, whether it was considered teaching or under other. And I don't think I have a clear answer for you today, other than the fact that it was my understanding that people are working to clarify that. Frank, I don't know if you have an update if the Academic Affairs Committee at WUFA level is looking at that, or is that still at the college level and hasn't reached the level of the...
I think it's still at the college level and it hasn't reached the university level yet. But I certainly can ask the university faculty assembly and academic affairs and even faculty affairs who help to kind of outline how the faculty handbook is working, where they think is most appropriate, and if we can add it to the faculty handbook where we should expect them to be. Because the University RPT Committee is going to be going back to the faculty handbook for their guidance too.
And there may be at the end of the day, because, for example, and I'm not saying this is how it's being handled now, but one of the areas that's clear that some people hold in different units, they have administrative appointments, for example, as part of their responsibilities. They're evaluated on those responsibilities, but not part of this. So if you have an administrative responsibility, like a program director, for example, could have 50% of their workload or more dedicated to being that role. But as far as this review process, as far as I understand it, all levels of review saying that's all well and good, but for the purpose of reappointment or promotion and tenure, we're not evaluating that. It's part of your annual performance review, but it's not really part of the reappointment, promotion, and tenure, because they're only evaluating teaching, service, and scholarship as part of that. Right? There are no other categories that are articulated in the faculty handbook currently.
So I was proper, I thought you completed your sentence, that I think what gets missed potentially there is clinical teaching, bedside teaching is teaching. And that comes, and there has been a tendency for those who are not clinical faculty to think of clinical activity as happening kind of as its own entity and is not related to bedside teaching or faculty activity. And I would encourage that thought process to evolve.
And to that point, that should be.
So we just need to
within the college, right?
kind of get Kat's point across that just for the Portland campus, so that people can hear that what Kat Brandt was saying is that it's important for the clinical faculty to realize that teaching at the bedside or teaching in the clinic isn't necessarily just clinical practice and part of evaluation of that clinical practice, but it really is part of teaching, and it needs to be evaluated as part of the teaching portfolio.
That's right. That's one way to do it.
But this is something that we've also talked about in the University Faculty Assembly for years, that it's the faculty members' responsibility for the whole portfolio, and some of that responsibility is determining where you personally think this specific activity goes. Is it teaching? Is it service? Does it go into the other category and need to be evaluated there? And it is nice to start to standardize some of it, but I think we still need a little bit of flexibility, because some people are going to see it one way versus another way. So just thinking about the other tabs, I think the other tabs get a little bit more specific, and we want to kind of flesh those out a little bit more, because that's really not going to be as standardized for all faculty, and that's where we're kind of moving forward with the next PowerPoint slide. So I found that if I didn't get creative and if I didn't write it on the slide, I would never remember to say it. So talking about the portfolio submissions, we ask you to be selective in your portfolio submissions. It is important to submit everything that you feel is important for your reappointment and promotion and tenure portfolio. But you also, if you're submitting a substantial amount of material, you need to direct the reviewers where they should be looking for the best examples or even good examples of your work. So this is actually a picture of a Bloody Mary that I personally, I wouldn't drink it this way, but you can see all the pizza and the onion rings and the extra sandwiches and chicken wings in there. Yeah, it's not the way I'd like my Bloody Marys. I like it with a lot less food, a lot less tomato juice, less ice, and no celery, and just the clear liquid. But the important thing is the second item down. We don't want you to be trying to hide what you're doing, right? So you can't use really smoke and mirrors to hide any shortfalls. You should be addressing your shortfalls in the portfolio, so that they aren't going to be a surprise to you, because they certainly aren't going to be a surprise to the committee that's reviewing you. They're going to see them, and they're going to want your perspective on any shortfalls that are in there. I think the thing to remember is the committees are pursuing excellence, but they aren't pursuing perfection. So as long as you're making your portfolio as easy to navigate as possible, as clear as you can make it, then the committee will find it easier to get through your portfolio effectively and critically assess your qualities as a faculty member.
Hey Frank, can
Go
I
ahead,
add one
Jennifer.
quick thing? It's just occurring to me. In terms of the process of evaluators, right? It's not usually the case that a member of the RPTC would sit down and read your portfolio all the way through in one sitting. So that's why if you can sort of think strategically about how to direct them to different spots for different things that they're considering at that moment, it's easier. So if you know what the reader's doing with it, that sometimes helps you think about how to organize.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of brings into the next point as well. You aren't going to get your portfolio submitted in a day. It's going to take you weeks to pull everything together, to get it organized the way you want it to be as clear as possible. So make a plan to take the time to make sure you have enough organizational skills to get it organized and submitted appropriately. The last thing is we were talking about this, Charles, Jennifer, and I, that it's better to submit a slightly messy portfolio that's complete and a little bit unorganized rather than a really, really well-polished portfolio that's missing major components. So I just kind of keep that organizational part in mind. All right, so as you're starting to build this, Jerry Mullen in Chemistry and Physics wrote a quick little description about the curriculum vitae and what he was expecting when he was chair of the university RPT committee. And rather than me just reading through it, I think the focus here really should be, you should make sure your CV is specific for your portfolio and it reflects the items that you're emphasizing in your portfolio should also be emphasized in your CV. So you should be listing the courses you're teaching and the semesters you're teaching them with your scholarship. I personally agree that reverse chronological order makes a lot more sense than chronological order. So you go from the most recent time and you go back in time as you go down the page, rather than chronological order where I can see what you did as an undergraduate and then when I see what you did as a graduate student for years on end. Getting into the service, a master list certainly helps. I know for me, I don't certainly list absolutely everything, but it kind of comes down to, well, what's the most important and what seems to meet my personal criteria for what should be on the RPT committee. But once again, it really helps if you have the documentation to support all of these statements, right? So you're going to have your course evaluations from peers as well as from students. You're going to need your scholarship and representations of your scholarship or all of your scholarship. And for the service gets a little bit harder to document, and you certainly, and I know as chair of faculty assembly, people have reached out to me and said, can you write a letter to say I was a representative on the University Faculty Assembly, I served on this committee, we did this sort of work, and as chair of faculty assembly, I'm certainly willing to do that. But you can reach out to anyone that you did anything for and ask them for letters like that. Or if someone sends you a thank you for doing anything, I get thank yous all the time, and from my email, I'll just print the PDF and just save it in my thank you folder, sitting inside of my internal service or external service for my RPT portfolio.
Frank, can I say
Go
something
ahead,
about
please.
service? And one of the things that the deans look at for service is we would like to see more than I served on this committee for 2 years, because we have no idea what that means. Did you just come and did you just sit there? So if it would be good for you to explain what you did as serving on that committee. If you have examples, that's great. But to explain what it was that you did, especially if you're going up for full professor, it's expected that you're going to be a leader in service. And so it is good to be able to document what leadership opportunities did you take advantage of, and what did you do as you were in those different committees, task force groups, or whatever you're in.
So like reports from those committees or motions that came out of the committees or the results of those motions.
Or a description of, the different activities that were done.
All right, questions? All right. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I actually, and this is a comment, and we're going to certainly be talking about this in the workshop in the spring. I would like Charles and Jennifer and Frank to address it, or any of you. My understanding right now that the faculty handbook language does not mandate that you have to have conducted service at all levels of department, college, and university level service to be successful in progression. So to the point that Charles just made, you could be doing amazing service at the department level, like revising the curriculum, creating a new program, and so forth. I've seen that get very muddled historically since I've been here a while, but I would just like folks to comment on that. It's certainly, I think, part of being a good member of the community as professional responsibility. You would look to be doing service across the university. As it relates to it being an expectation that you do it, to be successful in progressing through the reappointment, promotion, tenure process. the current language does not mandate that happen. So I'd just be interested to hear people's comment on that.
At least in the College of Arts and Sciences, there's another level where Frank said that there's the University Faculty Handbook, and then each of the college has their own description. In CAS, each department has their own RPT protocols. And in those, some of those do actually state what the expectations for service are. At least I think in marine science, which is the one that I was just looking at, it states that for you to be considered a leader and to be eligible to become a full professor, if there is an expectation that you will serve on college level committees. So I would encourage you to go look at your own department RPT protocols to see what it says for your own promotion. And I know it doesn't say in the university handbook, but I know it does in the departments.
Right, and I think that it's an important fact, because you got to be looking at all the levels. Now, not all the colleges have those departmental standards, so you may find you're chasing something that doesn't exist. But certainly in the College of Arts and Sciences, those departmental standards exist. So up in Portland, one of the faculty members had a question, and she was reaching out to Mike because she had his cell phone number. So we'll just wait on Erin's question. And oh, okay, go ahead, Erin. All right.
Could you just think strategically about how many thank you emails you're going to put, and are they going to be meaningful and relevant for the reviewers that have to click on and open tons of emails if that's not a good use of our time?
So I think her point was, and it gets back to Frank's comment earlier about being selective about what you're choosing to include. If you include 1,000, everything you've done, and you're getting a little thank you email, Erin's comment is, as a reviewer, it's actually maybe irritating to the committee to be opening up 50 emails that are saying thank you for the help you gave on an interview session on a Friday afternoon or something like that. Just to be, she's asking to be more strategic with your thing. That's her suggestion.
Yeah, and I guess I can understand that point, but I think it's also important to maybe combine them so that you can see the volume of these thank yous for participating this and this and this and this and this. So maybe you could qualify it in this is for admissions help. And that when the committee clicks onto the admissions help thank yous, they can see, well, is there one or two, and then I can read them, or there are 88, and I can assume each one of those is probably for a different event, and this person might be more involved with those admissions activities.
And if I could add a few things. So I really appreciate that comment because, again, it's important to balance the need to fulfill the documentation that serves your application and serves the needs of the committee, while also recognizing their needs and their experience in kind of wrestling with your portfolio. And so, so one kind of compromise measure might be, so if there's one thing that you want to document, but you have a whole bunch of thank you notes about it, then put them all in one PDF.
Yep.
Right? And there's not necessarily the expectation that the committee will read all of them, but it'll be, that's the one thing, right? And sometimes, what people can do is they could put like a table of contents at the beginning, like a Word file that they convert to PDF at the end. A table of contents at the beginning of each of the tabs that says, here's what's in it, right? And so in order of appearance. And so, one of the items would be thank yous for, student interviews. And you could even list the names of all the recipients, right? If you wanted to make the point that, but that would save the committee from having to click, 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 and it would make them realize they don't necessarily have to read them all.
Yes.
You good, Aaron? Yep.
Right. Could you guys hear that well enough? No.
No.
All right. So I think what Erin was trying to say is that, like I was talking about with Kat, that people are going to see different things, teaching or scholarship or service, in different lights, and they may see a specific activity as falling into one category or another category. And I think that's what Jennifer is going to start to address in really the self-evaluative statement. But I think that's what part of the self-evaluative statement is going to be about, is you need to say, these are the standards. I understand there's university and college and even departmental standards, but even within those, there's enough wiggle room that I need to tell the reviewers where I'm putting these specific activities and why I'm putting them in those areas. So I think with that, I would hand it over to Jennifer, who helped write, or who did write the next couple slides about the self-evaluative statement.
Should I stand over there?
You can stand over here.
I don't know where we're being recorded from.
So we're being recorded from my computer, so the closer you are to my computer, the easier it makes it,
Okay.
but nobody's watching you.
Right.
Well, we're watching you in here, but they're not
Okay.
watching you up in Portland.
Okay, thank you. Most of the stuff I have to say about writing the self-evaluative statement is really kind of common sense. What Frank has done helpfully, and this will be good because this PowerPoint will be available on the Provost website, is really just sort of transfer my notes that I used to use when I was speaking in front of a group like this without them being projected. So I don't want to be super boring and just read them all, but I might just quickly touch on each thing to make sure that we've covered everything. And so the first principle, and again, I sort of approached this task in part as a former member of the RPTC and in part as an English teacher, right, thinking about when I teach writing, some of the basic principles, because really they do apply. Consider the nature and needs of your audience. And we've already been talking about this before, right? So what is the context? Who are these people? What do they know? Do they not know? What do they need? What information do they need from you? What do they not need? And so the first point has to do with an approximate length. And I don't know, I think this may have evolved over the years. I think it's sort of getting longer and longer and longer every year. But I'll just say that, when I was serving the RPTC a number of years ago, and what I had been advised before that was around 8 pages for your self-eval. Maybe a page or two longer than that. But if it's much longer than that, your committee's going to be really feel very put upon. And it may be that you will be going on longer than you actually need to. You may have a position or something where there are special circumstances, where there's something that needs a little bit more explanation. So I don't think that the committee necessarily goes in with a sense that there's a hard and fast rule about how long your self-eval needs to be. But again, just keep in mind that if you have that as a target, that will help you get a sense of whether you're really going on too long, whether too many examples, too much detail. I don't think there's ever been anyone who's had a problem with not enough. And again, think this is basic stuff. It's the same principle that would apply if you're writing a letter applying for a job. Don't use 10-point font, please. Single-spaced is fine, but again, these are all small matters, but they actually have a big impact on the experience the committee has of reading your self-evaluative statement. So a reasonably sized font, enough white space on the page that the committee doesn't have a heart attack when they open, the document. And so then that arrow is a sort of sub-point to that, but again, just clarifies that you don't need to be exhaustive. The committee will have access to your CV, so you don't need to list every single thing. It's about choosing the most illustrative examples to make your points. And again, subheadings are a beautiful thing that can really help to chop up what might otherwise be a difficult to navigate document if it's very dense. So feel free to use those. It's always helpful to readers to have them, and they don't have to be teaching scholarship service only. If there's a sort of reason why you think another type of approach to that would be better, fine. But if it sort of corresponds to the e-portfolio and to your CV, then that helps everybody stay oriented. Again, obvious, but I'll just reiterate because it still is often an issue, is to, you need to write intelligently, but you need to pitch your terminology so that the person furthest from your field of expertise understands what you're saying. You are not writing for specialists in your field, and if it's really jargony or really convoluted or specific, you're going to lose the reader and therefore not achieve your goal. And of course, again, same principle goes with any good writing. Seek out a mentor, someone who's been through the process and or who has served on an RPT committee. Ask them to read it for you and let you know very honestly what needs to be done to strengthen it. And then, of course, also please just obviously proofread it. Make sure that it's as clean and clear and coherent as possible. Let's see, what do I do next?
Just down.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, and again, this goes along with what Frank had said before, but really, your self-eval is your one free-form opportunity to guide the RPTC through your portfolio. It's where you get to have a little bit more control to shape perception. So take that opportunity and help them. Obviously, again, you are writing for a mix of people, and you should just assume that the people in your field are going to get it. So write for the people who have absolutely no idea what people in your field necessarily do. And therefore, explain anything that might need explaining. So for example, there may be conferences or publication venues that are particularly significant. In terms of evaluating scholarship, the nature of the dissemination venue, the stature or quality of that venue may matter, right? And often does matter in terms of evaluating that scholarship. So make sure that your audience knows why or in what ways that particular venue was important, especially if it's something where they might read it as, oh, this is just a small regional journal, right? This really isn't a very significant achievement to have published there. Well, actually, maybe that's not the case at all. So make sure that you kind of anticipate what those questions might be and explain if needed. If there are any gaps in your scholarly record that you think need explanation, feel free to explain those. If there are things that come up a lot in your teaching evaluations, this is obviously a really important opportunity for you to get ahead of that. So if there's a particular sort of theme that's emerging that you think might shape the committee's perceptions not in your favor, this is your opportunity to say, I recognize that this happens a lot, or the students have this perception or say this frequently. here's what this is about, or here's what I'm doing actively to continue to address it, or whatever. And again, we've talked about the sort of 3 sets of guidelines. We have department, we have college, we have university. Ideally, and as all of these are drafted and published and checked off, they are not supposed to be inconsistent. It's simply supposed to be a case where you have the university guidelines, then you have college that are more specific versions. What does that look like in our college? And then same thing, more specific with department. So one way you can help the review committee make sense of all that is to use your departmental guidelines, to explain how, in fact, what you're talking about in the specific addresses these larger, slightly more general expectations. Right. And of course then making clear what are your goals as a scholar, what are your goals as a teacher, what are your goals as a clinician, what are your goals in service. If you have a sense of a coherent set of goals that you're pursuing rather than just sort of scattershot, this is that's a strength that's important, and this is a place to make that visible if it might not otherwise be. Mike, you had
I
your
just
hand
wanted
up.
to make a follow-up comment about, and it goes back to Frank's comment about, not ignoring things that may be areas for improvement. I think committees want to see that you directly acknowledge those types of things, and then what are your plans to actually address them. And to the teaching one, not that I'm speaking from personal experience, of course, but if you get areas of concern identified on your teaching evaluation, sometimes you can get really lengthy responses from like 1 or 2 students, and it's not necessarily reflective of the majority of but it may seem that way. If you read the comments, it appears like, oh my gosh, the bulk of the comments are about that, but if you distilled it and you analyzed it, and if you went back up to the actual ratings, it may only be that 5% of the class actually felt that way, 95% of the class was, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think your ability to, again, you're doing your own interpretation of that. I'm not saying it's not important to pay attention to a subset of comments that may appear in course evaluations, but I have found it really helpful when the faculty member has taken the time to do that level of analysis and then actually report it back and set goals. So if there was an area of concern that, let's say 30% of the respondents to a course evaluation said X, they set a goal to, some objective measure in a subsequent year, and they actually were able to report that in a much more objective fashion than just a generic statement, I hope my course evaluations are better next year, or something like that.
Yeah, thank you.
I would also say that, let's say 2 things about, there's at least one point, one of the things when Jennifer is saying that you're writing this not for just an expert in your field, at least a lot of times in the college RPT committees or the university RPT committees, there might be someone else that can help the committee determine what's important and what's not. But at the dean's level, there is not. The dean is reading this all by her or himself. And also in the beginning where Jen said the self-evaluation statement helps guide it, think about, when you're writing this, think about the fact that the dean gets these and she or he might get 15 or 20 of these, and she's going to do it all herself. So in any way you can to make the job easier for the reader helps you. It may not be completely fair, you think, but these are humans reading this, and the easier you make it for them, the better, the better they're going to be able to evaluate what's going on with yours. And one other thing I would like to say, I'd like to continue on what Mike Sheldon said, is that even if it is a small percentage, I know at least our dean, if it comes up every year that 10% of your class finds something objectionable, and the first 2 years you dismiss it because it's only 10%. But in year 5, if that is not changed and you've not addressed it, that is a problem. So even if it's a small amount, but if it's continuous, you should address it. If you ignore it, I guarantee you, the college RPT committee and the deans will catch it. You cannot just brush any of these things off.
Charles,
Yes.
just thinking about that, do you think, maybe in your college specifically, that your dean would say something about that? Maybe not the first or the second year, but in the third, fourth, and fifth year annual eval, or maybe not the dean, but maybe more the chair. Do you think that should be addressed so that the faculty member knows that they need to address it?
Yes,
I think that's something that Mike and I have talked about, that we need to be sending a consistent message, and if you want activity from the faculty, it needs to be somewhat told to them. I'm expecting you to address these specific issues, and that's one of the things that I'm hearing as chair of faculty assembly, is that the letters need to be consistent and clear. Like if you want them to address this, it needs to be explicit. You need to address these specific issues. And I'm just hoping that it's going to be in there.
Yeah, so
I agree.
So, and to that point, again, when it comes time for the 3 and the 6th year reviews, things like what Charles is, that should not be a surprise. Those should have all been things that had been mentioned as part of the annual performance review process.
Yeah.
That they shouldn't be coming up for the first time here.
At 6 years or 12 years.
And that'll be a conversation that will carry over to next semester.
Absolutely.
For all the reviewers. Right.
And so that's something in your evaluation, your self-eval, right, where you can sort of explicitly address that. This has been an ongoing issue, right? And I've been getting good advice from whoever about it, and I've been doing this and that.
Yep.
So even if it's still appearing in the evals, if you provide that context, then at least the committee knows you're on it and that you care and that you're still thinking about ways to improve or address it.
And even if some of the times, you might get 10% of the comments say that the class is unfairly difficult. If it's worth explaining why you're doing what you're doing and why you may not want to make the changes, but then how you're communicating it to the students. You do not have to fix every single thing that the students complain about.
Right. Thank God. Right? Okay. And I think this is my last page.
Yes.
So finally, some of this stuff has been anticipated in our conversation just now, but I wanted to offer some suggestions about strategy, ways to approach the task. And, this is a tricky balance, but the first one is to write with confidence, self-assurance about your accomplishments, and yet humility, self-reflectiveness about the areas that still need work. Try to do both. All one or the other doesn't always serve you as well. Everyone will, if they've made it that far, will have plenty of things in that first category to crow about. And yet, it's very important always to recognize that you have more to be doing, that you still have areas that you want to improve further. It goes back to the idea that there isn't perfection. There is excellence and the continuing striving for excellence. The second point we've already covered, don't ignore the elephant in the room, because believe me, everyone will know it's there. So whatever that might be, if it's from teaching evals, if it's a gap in your productivity, if it's anything, whatever, just go ahead and do yourself that favor and do the evaluators that favor and give them the information they need to understand what that's about, why you are still, in fact, worthy of promotion or tenure or whatever. This somewhat echoes the first point I made, but I just want to reiterate that introspection, the self-reflectiveness, the willingness, not simply bragging about your accomplishments, but that willingness to sort of think through, who am I as a teacher, for example, and what are my strengths that I know are my strengths, but what are my overall goals? What are my challenges that I'm continually working on? The evidence that you are willing always to consider criticism with respect, to filter that in ways that are meaningful, as we've talked about, and really to always have an eye to how you can be that much better. That's really valuable. This point I alluded to earlier, but I just want to remind you again that you can supplement the statement with other verbiage placed elsewhere in your portfolio. So you might have tables of contents at the beginning of each major tab. That's helpful to the reviewers, again, if they're very pithy, because then they know where to look to find that thing that they're trying to find that you said was in that tab. But also, there may be a couple of sentences that you want to offer by way of explanation of something or other. Again, I'm not saying to add new self-evaluative statements in other places at all, but what I'm saying is that you can be creative that way. And remember, there's that other information tab too, which sky's the limit there. There may be things that you feel are really important as context for people evaluating you, or as content for it, as evidence, that don't normally get considered. And you should feel free to use that tab for those things. And again, provide the guideposts either in the self-evaluative statement or in a table of contents that explains what's in there. And then finally, I don't know if everybody agrees on this, but my experience as a reviewer on the RPTC is that the self-evaluative statement is really not a place where you need to have footnotes and citations. It's not meant to be that kind of document, and it's actually not operating at that level of specificity. And I don't mean to say that you should never have them. There may be a situation where there's something that you feel needs a documentation of some kind, fine. But I'm just clarifying that it's different from a grant application. It's certainly different from a work of scholarship, and it's really meant to be mostly, your own words and your own framing of your application. Mike.
There's a question again, and whether this varies by college. So another thing that came up that I still was unclear on, and this goes to the page that Frank first showed when you go to enter it. In the checklist, there's something that says annotated. I think it's annotated table of contents, right?
Yes.
And it appears that is not necessarily required across all colleges. And I'm asking because it came up a couple of times where somebody who's submitting their portfolio said, I was told I didn't have to do that. And then somebody, so I'm just asking, is that, to your knowledge, that is an expectation across all colleges, or you have to read the fine print in your respective appendix as it relates to that requirement?
And before you answer that, can I just say that maybe we should also clarify what do we think we mean by that? Because my experience with it has always been, but again, it's been a few years since I've served on this committee, is that it's basically you take the table of contents for the e-portfolio from the faculty handbook and you add levels of detail so that it becomes a customized table of contents for your portfolio. So within each tab, what do you actually have? That's my understanding of what it means. Annotation, in other words, doesn't refer to documentation, footnotes, whatever. But Frank, what do you know?
No, I agree with you, Jennifer, that's the way I see it as well, that this annotated table of contents is you're taking the checklist from the handbook and plugging it in and then adding your specific details. But I think Mike's question, and certainly when I've submitted my material, it's really a duplication of that checklist. But the checklist actually has little boxes that you need to check, or that are there to be checked. I'm not so sure they need to be checked, but they're available to be checked but it's really almost a duplication. And I think, Mike, that might be something that you as the provost could look into, or we certainly could have the faculty affairs committee look into to see if it's really a duplication of effort and there's really no difference between them.
Helpful addition.
Yeah.
I have a question. One way this was introduced to me and that I've passed on is that the annotation could be a place where maybe you're offering some translation. So again, coming from the clinical point of view, you know, we have in the comm supplement, here's these performance indicators that look weird to anybody who's not a clinician. Here's a 50. What's a 50?
Okay.
You know, so the annotations then say, this is what a 50, you know, in a sentence. There could be orientation. I don't know if that's how you want to use that.
So for those on Portland, the suggestion was that the annotated table of contents could be used as a place to sort of clarify what acronyms mean, that it would be a sort of helpful guideline for people not specialists.
I don't know if it's a suggestion or a relay of what was told to me in a check-in.
Okay.
I'll just put this as a to-do because we should clarify. This would be a
No,
clarification.
it'd be a clarification.
Yeah. Okay. That's my bit. Thank you.
So this is Frank again. Just continuing through the PowerPoint, a lot of this really now gets into specifics about evidence for teaching and documentation for teaching. And each of the colleges, or at least most of the colleges, have very specific suggestions. And these are not exhaustive lists, but they're suggestions for what you might consider. So here from the College of Dental Medicine, in teaching evidence and documentation, you can see they go from A to Q with their recommendations for what they might consider as evidence for teaching and documentation for teaching. There'll be a different one from the College of Osteopathic Medicine and a different one from the College of Arts and Sciences and the Westbrook College of Health Professions. I just happened to choose the most exhaustive lists that I could to give everyone else that isn't necessarily from those colleges a chance to look at other things that they may choose to include. So moving from the teaching evidence to the scholarship evidence, now from the College of Arts and Sciences, but each of the colleges has their own specific evidence now, just detailing what the College of Arts and Sciences considers evidence and documentation. Once again, not an exhaustive list, but a representative list.
Frank,
Charles.
This one, I think, at least for the College of Arts and Sciences, is very important to look at what your department determines what is scholarship evidence and documentation, and what the expectations are, because they are very different from department to department. So if you if you are just starting, I would talk with your department chair to find out exactly what the expectations are, and have that argument with your department chairs in the beginning, not right before you're going to put your portfolio together.
Yep.
Because you should not be surprised that you've not met the scholarship requirements. You should have known that a couple of years before.
And these specific, departmental specific requirements are currently housed from the College of Arts and Sciences on the V drive, but it's something that we're starting to discuss about including in the faculty handbook on an annual basis, so it's all in one documentation, or all in one document. So moving on from scholarship evidence to service evidence, now once again each of the colleges has documentation for service, and this is from the Westbrook College of Health Professions, but it is there for other colleges, and once again, not an exhaustive list, but a representative list. So it gives you a sense for how you do this. And like Charles was saying before, maybe not just a list of every single committee you served on, or thanks from all these committees that you might have served on, but evidence of what you did, reports that were created, motions that came forward, results of those projects. So once you've assembled your portfolio, this next slide here just gives you a sense for how the reappointment and promotion process works and how the review process works depending on how the reviews come out, where the portfolio goes next. So for everyone, there's a sub-college committee, there's a chair or a director, there's a college committee, and a dean that are all going to review your portfolio. Then, depending on if they're all positive or if they're all negative, your review tends to be completed there. It's reviewed at the university level to be sure that the process was followed appropriately, and then it moves up to the provost and the president. If there's any sort of disparity between the reviews, then it tends to go more to the university RPT committee, which has a broader view of the whole university, to get their input before it goes to the provost and to the president. So this is all documentation just laying out from the faculty handbook how the process is going to work. So as that process proceeds, the faculty should hear from the president mid-March or so, and as they hear from the president about their reappointment and or promotion and or tenure as the process is going, they should get letters. The president's letter is usually really short, saying, yes, we're going to reappoint you, or no, we aren't going to reappoint you, or promote you, or give you tenure, or whatever the case may be. But what we're recommending is the faculty members go back and look at the letters. And here is just a sample of what the AAUP says would be a letter offering constructive advice. Your letter shouldn't just come through and say, oh, this person is the best thing ever. There should be parts that are emphasizing your good points, but parts that are showing you where you should build for your next reappointment review or your next promotion review. So this sample is pulled from the good practice guidelines, and it just kind of details some of the specific things that we're going to look for. This is a little bit about the candidates, but more for the committees. As the committees are writing the letters, we want the committees and the deans and the provost, when they're writing letters, to write clear, concise letters that have constructive feedback and definitive decisions made. Because I know I've been on some of these committees and we'll evaluate, but we don't feel strongly enough to come up with a recommendation, which personally I find a little bit challenging. But that's the way the committee kind of wanted to leave the letter, just kind of leave it hanging. And it's like, and they wanted to leave it hanging for the next level. And I was like, yeah, but it's not how it's supposed to be set up. So, with your evaluation letters, you should be looking for the accuracy of the letter. Does it really reflect what you've done? Does it address your shortfalls? Can you understand what it says about your shortfalls and how you should be addressing your shortfalls? Does it talk about your areas of excellence and what you're doing right, and maybe where you shouldn't necessarily be focusing your efforts anymore if your shortfalls are significantly outweighing those areas of excellence? And the last sort of thing it should focus on is your future goals. And in this future goals, it should be partially addressing your shortfalls, but also starting to outline what you should be shooting for in the next steps of evaluation, whether it's the reappointment or the promotion or the tenure review. So that's really what you're looking for in your letter. You shouldn't be looking for a huge glowing letter that says you're the best thing ever, but it should give you constructive things to work on. So in the interest of time, unless there's other questions, I talked to Jennifer and Charles and certainly myself. You can reach out to us at any time with questions, and we will certainly address those questions for you. I'm sure you can reach out to Mike, your department chairs, and your deans if you have questions about the whole process. And we just included our contacts there. Megan?
So I have a question about recommendations. If you had things kind of decoupled, and you've been through the process and have been through the process multiple times, and so you have historic recommendations from external persons. And at your next level of review, you were being asked some of the same people and you still work with them. How do you address that? Do you ask for a new letter? Is that frowned upon? Do you have to keep reaching further and further? How did advise? So if I could, as an example.
Yes, please, go ahead.
With 4 years of credit toward promotion and 0 years toward tenure. So
Okay.
I came here, the first thing I did after a year and a half was apply for promotion. And so, at that level, because it was an
Yep.
exciting thing, I had 10 or 12 letters from all these collaborators, whatever. So that was fine, and that went okay, that went well. And so then after that, a third year review. Okay, well, this is less impactful, but still serious. So I added a few more, and now I'm actually doing my official tenure review. But it's odd because at this point I've got 12 letters from people I still work with, and I almost feel if I went to get a new suite of letters, they would be from people I work less closely with.
I guess I would do a couple of things then. But this is my personal advice to you, Megan, rather than I'm recommending what the university says.
Can
So-
you restate the essence of the question?
So the essence of the question is really when people have historical letters, right, that have spanned the 6-year process, the letters that maybe came in the first year may not be as relevant now 6 years later, but they're still working with the individual. So one of the things that I would do, Megan, is I would reach out to the person that wrote that initial letter 6 years or 5 years ago for you and say, could you update your letter for me? I would also be inclined to include their letter from 5 years ago so that they'll know that there's a historical record to it, but that'd be more kind of put into that other documentation standard. But at the same time, we kind of run into are you just overwhelming people with information as well? And I think the updated letters for me, when I was on the committee, would carry more weight than 5 years of the same letter over time. I think if you're reaching out for new letters from people that you didn't have as close a contact to, that wouldn't produce the strength that I'd be looking for as your most successful or active collaborations. So I think it'd be more I'd be looking for updated letters more than anything else. Up in Portland, they had a question that is the presentation is going to be happening again at another time. The idea is we were going to video this, and as long as the recording worked okay, we know that the voice connection didn't work very well, that we're going to hopefully just stick with the video recording, and that will go with the more training the evaluators in the spring. If it didn't go well, or if we're hearing from junior faculty, so by junior faculty, what I mean is people who are not professors, anybody below that level, that if they need another session or want another session where they can interact more, yeah, we will certainly be able to run another session, I would think. Are there other questions? Oh. Oh, thank you. All right, so I'm gonna kind of wrap it up here then. But if anyone has any questions, Erin is calling you, Mike. So Erin might have a question, so hang on. But
Hold on a second. I'm gonna put you on speaker.
and we'll be able to hear your question.
Go ahead.
So on behalf of the college committee, I just would like to give some more information and not questions.
That's fine.
So, to know the handbook and to list the criteria that you're in the standards that you're being evaluated against, the committee found that extremely helpful. Labeling documents was extremely helpful. And when you place many documents in many different places, but it's redundant, that is not helpful. There are lots of outdated CDs. So we've already summarized what the good properties were in your PowerPoint, so I won't repeat those. So thank you for letting me put that on the audio. And I think the last point of the AAP letter, the constructive advice, perhaps we should discuss that further because they're getting some different input as to what to put in the letter.
Yeah, and
The evaluative process and what you want to do.
okay, and I think Erin will start to address that more in our spring session for what should be in those letters as they come out from the committees. Great, thank you, Erin. All right, thank you all for attending. And if anyone reaches out to you asking for contact or for help or just looking for another session, please reach out to me and let me know, or Jennifer and Charles as well. Thank you.
Nice job.
Great job, Frank. Thank you very much. All right.
Very much.
Thank you, Mike. Your support means a lot.
Hopefully, we'll see how this comes out. Hopefully, it came out.
I know.
Oh, we practiced once.
You have to do it over again.
Yeah, that was a practice one.
That's right. What room are they in? I'm trying to identify that space.
That is the Newberry room.
Newberry room.
Is that-
What
is
room
that
So that's in Alumni Hall.
Oh, it's the new one.
And it's the back of the
Yeah.
Alumni Hall.
Okay,
Thank you, guys.
So that's why I haven't, I figured it must be an alumni because I haven't been in it since that room has been done. That's nice.
One of the concerns I have of workshops like this, and I think they're wonderful. I've in the past, none of them needed to be. They're all of their electronic work is for the ones. The ones that needed to hear this did not come.
Right.
I mean that's like.
Yeah, and that's the way it always goes.
Right.
But it's amazing to me that it's like, you know, I mean, we had two